So you're soaping the article? Yeah. 7.
He's going over there to do his dance. When Alexander
So, happy Wednesday. Everybody enjoy the our stroll second period?
Indeed.
We got to all go to the football field and hang out for a while.
No, yeah, but I mean, like, why was there?
False alarm, but then they decided to use it as another opportunity to test the search and rescue team. So we got to sit down there while I quickly ran through all the buildings to see if all the teachers properly placed X's in front of their rooms. Anyway, so this article kind of is your kind of shock and awe introduction to American imperialism. And so if we use the SOAPS technique to just kind of quickly dive in, what's the subject that they're talking about here? I kind of gave it away, but yeah. Okay, it could be Anglo-Saxon, but in what context? Imperialism. Okay. So it definitely is this idea. So in what the occasion? Why is this person writing about this thing at this time? What was the key? Yeah.
Well, the policy of expansionism that began in Wilson's administration.
So could be earlier than that though, but definitely about the policy of expansionism. So it's genuinely kind of talking about that. Should we ought to? Okay. The audience. Whom is this person talking to? What's the super creepy group that he's trying to appeal to here? What? Yeah, kinda. Okay, kinda. Yeah, that'll work.
Christians and
What's that?
The Christians and the aristocracy.
Yeah, okay, it could be Christian. There's kind of lots of different groups that are he's kind of trying to appeal to in there. Okay. So what's he telling us to do? Yeah.
To encouraging pro-imperialist policies.
And how? And what is he? What's his evidence? What is he? Yeah.
Like social Darwinism.
Social Darwinism. Yeah, I would have that in there somewhere. The speaker, who's this guy who avoided parties? Yeah.
Josiah Strong, who's our congressional minister.
Yeah. Okay. And then finally, what would be the significance of this thing? Why would you say this is a historically significant thing? Historically significant. How does this fit into the overall story of things? Overall story of things. Over here, overall story of things. But why is this important? Thank you.
Led up to World War I?
It could have a little bit to do with what leads us into World War I. What else? What's it basically get?
I mean, it kind of shows like a shift from like when America used to be kind of anti-imperialist, independent and based, and it's like they're shifting to wanting to control more of the world.
Yeah. Okay. So it definitely denotes perhaps a shift in American views. Okay.
Kind of created a competition between different parties and the views and races.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so do you see? And in this unit, I'm going to be tossing lots of little. There's lots of little snippets that you kind of have to be aware of as far as American views. As our warm-up next time, I've put up at Schoology kind of contrasting views over imperialism, and I just want you to kind of compare and contrast them. Just real quick as as your entrance ticket for next year. Okay, so it's hopefully today's lecture will give the context that you need to kind of think about it. Does that make sense? And then finally, for next time, I'm having you read about World War I. We'll probably just get to it next time. I think that the idea, the imperialism stuff is probably going to take us today and most of next period. Okay? Yeah.
When is like the grading for the test?
When over the weekend I saw that that there were a couple questions that way too many people missed, so I wanted to sit and kind of analyze what the questions were before I put up a grade. So the delay is in your favor.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. So I'm hoping tomorrow during first period I'll be able to do it. So that's my goal. All right, so the unit we are starting is unit 7, okay, 7 of 9, okay, 7 of 9. So we're getting toward the end. And if last unit was the awkward adolescent phase of American history, this is we kind of think we're all that phase, okay? We think we can change the world, okay? And naturally, what oftentimes happens when you think you can change the world, what do you find?
You can.
You can't, and then you get all bummed out about it, okay? So we go into like a fit of depression. But then duty will call, and we're actually going to have to do something again. Okay, so what we're seeing here is the birth of what some people call the American century, and really what happens in the two major wars that the United States will face in the 20th century, World War I and World War II, is basically putting the United States kind of on the map as far as a world power. Start first with the emergence, okay? How did the United States emerge as this world power? And the emergence happens, we know this cast of characters because we've already talked about them before, but this is really kind of the beginning of the United States as an emerging world power. Chris told us about a shift. And in order for that shift to take place, we're going to see kind of some philosophical ideas emerge in this time of American history. And the first is the United States is going to become a nation that has an incredible ability to produce both manufactured goods and agricultural goods. Our ability becomes so great that here at home we can no longer absorb everything we can produce. And so what do you need if you're producing more than you can buy? What do you need?
Consumers.
You need consumers. And guess where we're going to find those consumers? In Latin America, across the world. And so what the shift here is going to be is traditional imperialism is you control places, you control land. What the United States is going to discover at this time is that there's another way that you can kind of exert power and control, and that is economically. And so these markets that we were just told about, particularly in Latin America, what the United States is going to do is it's going to basically show its influence, its power, via its market, its ability to produce. We sometimes call this economic imperialism. The second thing that kind of shows up in this era is that idea of social Darwinism. I think it was pointed out when we were just reading about Josiah Strong that is an attitude that you could see in this article, right? That the Americans had this special thing going, okay, in both how they constructed their government and how awesome their religion is, and that these two things brought together made not just regular old awesome, they made awesome, okay, as far as the United States and its role in the world. You add to this good old Manifest Destiny. Now in the 1840s, Manifest Destiny was sea to shining sea. But in the 1890s, the superintendent of the census is going to say that we no longer have a frontier, we no longer have land within the land, right? And so does that mean we're done? Does that mean that's it? That's all she wrote? No more stuff for America? And so we basically are going to get Manifest Destiny part the world. The third thing that was kind of a driving force at this time, all the cool kids are doing it. Britain has colonies. France has colonies, okay? Shouldn't we ought to have colonies too? Okay? It's how you measure greatness in the world, is by the amount of territory that you control. And so this becomes a kind of a, are we a true world power or are we not a true world power? USA, we are going to be a world power now because we're going to have colonies too. The final shift is in our attitude. And it's kind of newly aggressive, and it's at the world stage that it's newly aggressive. I want you to all think back, because in order to argue something, it changes. Okay, change over time. We got to say what it was before. So I want you to all think back to the 1820s. Think of John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is going to say, we have this doctrine, the Monroe Doctrine, right, which says that the Western Hemisphere is the American Hemisphere. But there was a trick there. Does anyone remember the trick that John Quincy Adams figured out? There's something, we said that it's the United States controls or is the big power in the Western Hemisphere. But John Quincy Adams was being tricky. What's the tricky thing?
Is it that if there's an instability somewhere in the Western Hemisphere, America can
That's actually more of what it's going to become.
Is it that
Europeans can't come here. But there was a trick. There was a trick that John Quincy Adams was playing. So would you remember the trick?
Was it that they got Britain to be an enforcer?
Britain was the enforcer. So we put out there, aren't we awesome? Even if we really weren't. Okay? Because Britain, in its own self-interest, was going to keep everybody out of our hemisphere. So we could say, stay out of our hemisphere, yeah, Britain, stop them. Okay? Well, guess what? We a big kid now. And since we're a big kid, do we need Britain to be the enforcer anymore? No. And so what the new aggressive attitude, in effect, is basically the United States, in effect, saying, Britain will take it from here. Yeah, thanks for watching over the Western Hemisphere. That was really cool of you. All right, thanks. You can go. We'll do it now. And this coincided quite nicely with the United States starting to develop its modern steel navy. Remember that in this era of industrialization, who was now able to produce steel really cheaply, really well? United States. And we're now going to start to use this product to create a bigger and bigger and bigger navy. And note, as we have our modern steel navy, we are then able to go to the world and say, we're a big kid now. Okay, so does that make sense as far as attitude things? Now a couple of names that help develop this ship. The first is a guy by the name of Alfred Mahan. And what Alfred Mahan wrote was a book called The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1660 through 1783. Now, who do you think he was talking about when he's talking about the influence of sea power on history, 1660 through 1783? What power do you think he's talking about? Jim? He's talking about Britain. Okay, and what I love about the book, the dating here, what does he put as kind of the end point of massive British power? Does that date seem interesting? Yeah. That is the end of the American Revolution. So it corresponds the kind of the end of the greatness of Britain to it losing its colonies. Which colony? That would be us. And so I don't think this is an accident. I think he is basically now giving us a little eye on, now who's next? Who's going to be the next great power? And what Mahan will argue is that to be powerful, you need a strong navy. Now for the British, it was just a big navy. Now it's going to be one that needs steel. These steel ships. Furthermore, to show the power of the United States, what the United States is going to have to be able to do is it's going to have to move its ships around more easily. You see, we have got this problem, a geographical problem. What the geographical problem is that here is one side of the United States, here's the other side of the United States, but let's say you have Navy ships here and you need them here. What do you have to do? Oh my frickin'. That is not the way to run a country. You need to be able to move those ships more quickly. So therefore, if we truly want to be all that, we need Le Canal. Okay, so this, y'all are being, I bet you you're being all vain and thinking that's California. So this is Central America. We need a canal, okay? A canal across Central America. You were going with Canada. Oh, right. Oh, that's a first. Okay. Okay. Canadian canal. You know. So, the second thing that Mahan will argue that will show that the United States is all that. Boy. The next big market is going to be in Asia. And the United States needs to be able to get to that market more easily. It needs to decrease the distance. And the way to decrease the distance, the way to make it so that the United States can truly be a power in the East, is by controlling the Hawaiian Islands. And so, what Mahan's basically doing is he's kind of giving us the guide to empire. If we want to do it, this is what we got to do. Navy, canal, Hawaii. And we've already started the Navy thing. So canal and Hawaii. Does that make sense? A second player goes to that, to the idea of economics. His name is James G. Blaine, and he's from Maine. But he did run for president once, but he is more influential on American policy in his position as Secretary of State, and he was Secretary of State a couple times. As Secretary of State, he's going to advocate a change in American trade policy. So, what is the principle? If you're a Republican worth their salt in the post-Civil War era, what is your position on tariffs? Tariffs! Raise them high! Tariff, 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 tariff. Right? James G. Blaine says, yeah, that's a good idea. For France, for Germany, for Britain. Definitely keep the tariff high. Yes. Protect the American worker, protect American industry. But that is not what we should be doing with Guatemala. Guatemala, we should have a different attitude. And basically what the United States is going to start to pursue under James Blaine is what he called reciprocal tariff reductions. Hi Guatemala, how you doing? Well, Guatemala, you know what? We're going to make you a deal, okay? I'll tell you what. If we lower our tariff on bananas, okay, you can ship as many bananas as you want to the United States, duty-free. Will you lower your tariff on industrial goods? Deal. Okay? Now, partly here you would say, okay, but Mr. King, that's free trade. That's okay. But who really got the deal in that deal? Yeah. What makes much more money? Bananas or industrial goods? And basically what the United States is going to do is now they're going to start flooding Guatemala with industrial goods, getting Guatemala all hooked on those industrial goods, okay? Maybe even loaning Guatemala money so they can buy more, okay? And here we have now a market dependent upon what the United States produces. Industrial, economic imperialism. Yeah?
Is Guatemala like not a really small country compared to like France?
Absolutely. So you're going to do this with just Guatemala?
So you're going to do it with like...
You're basically going to do this across Latin America.
Okay.
So it's a, and this is speaking a little bit into the future, but what will also happen in places like Guatemala is that we'll say to Guatemala, you can produce all the bananas you want, but then who will start buying up the control of the banana plantations in Guatemala? American investors. United Fruit Company, sometimes known as Chiquita, okay, will start to buy up all of that land. Okay, and so who's really producing it? The United States. Who's really shipping it? The United States. Okay, and who's basically controlling almost both ends of that market? The United States. Does that make sense? All right, so this is an exception. Reciprocal tariff reductions, we will do it in situations where we think we can dominate the trade. We'll keep the high tariffs in place with other industrial nations. Countries that produce the same type of stuff as we do? We don't want their stuff. But if they have different stuff, and they have a need for our stuff, reciprocal tariff reduction. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now, that moment when the United States basically seizes control of the Monroe Doctrine. Up until really about this point, the United States was dependent upon Great Britain to be the enforcer, but it's during the Cleveland administration that we see a shift. okay? And we can even nail it down to perhaps one big event. What the big event was a conflict that Venezuela was having with Great Britain. You see, Great Britain had a colony right next door to Venezuela known as British Guiana. And the British claimed a whole big chunk of what Venezuela believed to be Venezuela. And conversely, okay, Venezuela claimed a whole bunch of what the British believed to be British Guiana. They did not agree as to where the border was. Now, what usually happens when you have big nation versus small nation, as far as border disputes, let's say Russia and the Ukraine, who gets to determine where the border is? Russia does. United States, Mexico, Nueces River or Rio Grande, who got to determine where the border was? United States. Okay? Well, basically, you've got the same situation going on in Venezuela and British Guiana. If big nation says the border is this border, guess what the border pretty much is? What the big nation says it is. And so, Venezuelans know they can't force the British to change the border. So they say, let's go to arbitration. Okay? Yeah?
What's stopping them from just taking,
That's a good point. They could have, but at this point, they just simply were claiming a bigger border, and the fact that Venezuela couldn't do anything about it, they were kind of saying that the border was whatever they said it was. Does that make sense? Okay. Anyway, the Venezuelans decide that the only place that they can actually have any type of say in this matter is in a world arbitration court. That an arbitration court might hear both sides and then determine what the border should ought to be. Is it in Britain's interest to go to arbitration? No. Because right now, they call it, it is what they say it is, and therefore, why go to court? So the British are going to reject arbitration, and this is a situation that, it is. And if it had been any other year in the 19th century, this would be the end of the story. Any other year before this, in the 19th century, the British say no, that's it. But there's a new sheriff in town, and his name is Grover Cleveland. And what Grover Cleveland's going to do is he's basically going to stick his nose into the conflict. He's basically going to say to the British that if you refuse to go to arbitration like Venezuela wants, the United States will send its own team of experts to determine what the border is, and the United States will stand by that decision. And by stand by, what do you think stand by means? Military. That the United States is now in effect threatening the British that unless you go to arbitration like Venezuela wants, we'll take care of it. So can everybody see this? Okay, so in effect, this is the United States saying to Great Britain, thanks for all the help all those years, but you're done. We're taking it from here. It's a huge shift in the Monroe Doctrine. It's the United States actually saying we're enforcing it now. And we don't believe that there should be a whole bunch of European colonization. And if you're basically trying to expand your territory, that's colonization, that's wrong. Got it? Yeah.
Can you explain arbitration?
So an arbitration would be a third party. In this case, it would be some sort of international court. And the third party would hear both Venezuela and Britain present what they think the border would be, and then they would make the decision.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
yeah.
So, and Venezuela wanted this because they knew that in a straight up with the British, they're lost.
Yeah.
They're gone. Okay? But if you did something internationally, Venezuela might have a shot. So if you did the same thing today with Ukraine, mightn't Ukraine have a shot at having control over the Crimean Peninsula again if they presented their case to a third party that it's their territory, the Russians present their case, and then the Ukraine would have a shot at controlling the Crimean Peninsula again. Whereas today, with it simply being Russia, do they have a shot at it? No. Yeah,
Why did Cleveland interfere?
that's a good question. Why do you think Cleveland interfered?
Did he want something from Venezuela?
He's not getting something directly from Venezuela, is he?
Oh,
But what is he getting?
Burden now.
It's something. It's something a little bit different. What is he getting?
He's establishing himself as like a big kid.
Yeah. Basically, what he is gaining is international influence. He is showing that who's now a world power? The United States. Now, this, interestingly enough, it actually went over fairly well in Latin America. Grover Cleveland, when he died in 1908, Latin American countries lowered their flags to half-staff in his honor. If you're thinking that's something they do often for American presidents, it is not something that is done often for American presidents, because they felt that, at least in cases like what was happening here in Venezuela, that they were doing in the interest of the hemisphere. Okay, the hemisphere. The second big area where the United States is kind of arriving on the world stage, and this basically goes right according to what Alfred Mahan tells us, Hawaii. Now, the American relationship in Hawaii had grown over the years. It had started in the early 1800s. Hawaii was a place for whalers and traders to stop off, get food, that type of thing. By the 1840s, Henry Clay would actually declare Hawaii to be an extension of the American coastline, basically putting it in the American sphere of influence. The 1870s, the relationship gets really tight. The United States and Hawaii are going to sign a reciprocal trade agreement, okay? And the United States is basically going to say that Hawaiian sugar can enter the United States duty-free in exchange for the Hawaiians lowering their tariff on industrial goods.
Thank you.
The relationship gets so tight that Hawaii is going to give up one of her jewels and give it to the United States. Okay, does anyone, I use this word jewel because of what it is that they give. Does anyone, yeah?
Is it copper?
It is Pearl Harbor. Okay, Pearl Harbor. They give the United States a perpetual lease on Pearl Harbor. And so what does this allow the United States to move to Pearl Harbor? Military. Its fleet is now stationed in Pearl Harbor, yeah.
Why is its own like separate country?
It is a kingdom of Hawaii. Okay, separate country. So, have I set up that the relationship is tight? While this relationship was developing, many Americans will move to Hawaii and buy up land and start producing sugar. So now you have these Hawaiian Americans, okay, who are enriching themselves by being able to sell sugar to the United States duty-free. Got it? But in the 1890s, the United States made a change. What they do is they basically end that free ability of Hawaii to export sugar. They don't quite do it in, you can't do it anymore. Instead, what they do is they go to American sugar growers and they say, American sugar growers, we're going to pay you 1 cent per pound for your sugar just for growing it. And they subsidize American sugar. And so American sugar is subsidized. Who has the advantage in the market? The Americans or the foreign exporter, even if they don't have to pay a duty? The Americans do. And so if you are a Hawaiian American sugar grower in Hawaii, what are you kind of now wanting to become? Part of the U.S., so you can get the subsidy. Does this make sense? And so sugar growers start thinking, maybe being part of the United States would be a good idea. At that same time, the Queen of Hawaii, Queen Liliuokalani, okay, she starts to see that Americans have gained an extraordinary amount of influence over the Hawaiian Islands. And that native Hawaiians have lost their influence. Native Hawaiians have lost their basic ability to govern the islands. And so she begins kind of a Hawaii for Hawaiians movement to try and restore the Hawaiian majority as the people truly in power in Hawaii. Well, so now, you are an American sugar grower who thought maybe it'd be kind of cool to be part of the United States, and now you're seeing a threat. A threat to your influence, a threat to your power. And so what you gonna do? You're gonna rebel. And so a rebellion begins, led by the white minority in Hawaii, largely Americans. And who is there to help? The United States. Remember, we have all those forces in Pearl Harbor. We have the Navy in Pearl Harbor. We have all that stuff in Pearl Harbor. Well, guess whose troops will help in this coup? The United States. They then take the Queen and they lock her up in a second-floor bedroom in the palace. And they declare that they are now the Republic of Hawaii. As the Republic of Hawaii, they now say to the United States, United States! Take us, we're yours. And President Benjamin Harrison, as one of his last acts as President of the United States before he leaves office in 1893, will submit a treaty of annexation saying that Hawaii should now become part of the United States. Got it? However, yeah.
I have a question. So, like, In order to just like legally say that Hawaii can take the
Mhm.
Republic of like Hawaii, how does that happen?
So they basically negotiate. So the new government of Hawaii comes in and negotiates with the United States and says, hey, we're willing to be annexed if you want us. And they sign a treaty. And so this was a treaty of annexation. It was negotiated between the United States and this new government in Hawaii. Does that make sense? But Grover Cleveland was re-elected in 1892, and he takes office in 1893. And when he comes into office, he finds that this treaty of annexation had not yet passed through the Senate. So he withdraws it. He withdraws it because he believed that the majority of Hawaiians did not want to become part of the United States. He believed that the authority to rule a place comes via the consent of the governed, and that this was a violation of the basic core principles of the United States to annex a place that does not really want to be annexed. However, when Grover Cleveland leaves office, okay, William McKinley will annex Hawaii in 1898. And it will then remain as a colony to the United States. Okay? Until basically the 1950s, when it becomes a state. Yeah?
Where's the queen?
She has been deposed by this point. She was thrown out of power. The new government locked her up as a political prisoner. They basically forced her over a series of time to basically give up all her power.
So between like 93 and 98, it was all ruled by like
The white minority,
Okay.
as the Republic of Hawaii.
Okay.
Okay. Any questions here? Yeah.
Why didn't he just at that point make Hawaii a state as well?
Because we're going to find another thing, okay, which is as the United States starts gathering territory at this time, it's going to be a little bit different than the territories that we had gotten when we had expanded before. Territory which was largely empty. What the United States is going to find is that much of the territory they're gathering at this point is full of other people. And should those other peoples be given the same rights that Americans have? And that's going to be the question. Does that make sense?
When we acquired like Puerto Rico, that's the same question, right?
It's the same idea. The same idea. Okay. Yeah. Whoop. So the third big area that developed kind of conflict in this era was Cuba. In 1895, the Cubans are going to revolt against Spain. Now this revolution is going to basically get a reaction from the United States, which is basically mixed. One section of Americans are going to say, the Cubans, you know what they're doing? They are having a revolution against a European power. We once had a revolution against a European power. The Cubans want to be like us. Oh, viva la Cuba! Woo! Okay. And then there are.
Do they actually say Viva la Cuba?
Write that down. It's enough, right? And then there are those who, over the years, had been investing in Cuba, had bought up sugar plantations. And what they found is that this conflict between Cuba and Spain, you know what it did to their bottom line as far as profits were concerned? Is it good to have a revolution where people are burning up your sugarcane fields when you want to produce and sell sugar? No. And so basically what many people wanted was an end of this revolution, get rid of Spain, increase American influence so that you can increase American profits. The Spanish responded to the revolt by sending in the military. Sending a guy by the name of Guillermo the Butcher, yes, the Butcher Wheeler. And what Wheeler did, he used the kind of by all means necessary thing. Whatever it takes to crush the revolution, he will do. Most notably, he used concentration camps. He starts rounding up radicals, possible radicals, and radicals' friends, and basically placing them in camps to basically bring the revolution under control.
Were the radicals into the communism stuff? Or?
No, just any revolutionary at this point.
Okay.
Okay, that's a little later. Yeah.
Are there communists?
Not really, not in Cuba at this point. This would have just been more, the radicalness was getting rid of the Spanish overlords at this point. But, the communism really comes out more in regards to a dictator later by the name of Diaz. When the Congress hears about this crushing of the Cuban revolt, they pass a resolution stating the United States should ought to do something. But President Cleveland doubted their intentions. Okay? He believed that the reason why Congress was so interested was because they wanted to dominate. And so Cleveland will ignore the resolution. However, in 1896, and then taking the presidency in 1897, is William McKinley. And William McKinley is going to approach the matter of Cuba a little bit differently. For one, McKinley would fall prey or be influenced by what we call the yellow press. So remember in our last unit we talked about yellow journalism versus muckrakers. And I tried to establish, have you kind of establish a difference between the two. And when you were talking about yellow journalism, what was it that would be notable about yellow journalism? Yeah.
It's what the people want to hear.
Yeah, it's trying to get a good story. Yeah.
Exaggeration and sensationalism.
Exaggeration and sensationalism. Okay? And so, the yellow press and public opinion will play a huge role in the United States getting into a war with Spain. So, the first example, and I'll give you a couple today. The first example is an editorial. This is written by Joseph Pulitzer. And I want you to listen to it And then while you're listening, basically just jot down this. What is Pulitzer saying, and what is he trying to do? So the editorial was in the New York World newspaper, and it was entitled "How Long?" How long are the Spaniards to drench Cuba in the blood and tears of her people? How long is the peasantry of Spain to be drafted away to Cuba to die miserably in a hopeless war that Spanish nobles and Spanish officers may get medals and honors? How long shall old men and women be murdered by the score, the innocent victims of Spanish rage against patriot armies that they cannot conquer? How long shall the sound of rifles in Castle Moro at sunrise proclaim that bound and helpless prisoners of war have been murdered in cold blood? How long shall Cuban women be victims of Spanish outrages and lie sobbing and bruised in loathsome prisons? How long shall women passengers on vessels flying the American flag be unlawfully seized and searched by brutal, jeering Spanish officers in violation of the laws of nations and the honor of the United States of America? How long shall American citizens arbitrarily arrested while on peaceful and legitimate errands be immured in foul Spanish prisons without trial? How long shall the United States sit idle and indifferent within the sound and hearing of murder? How long? You ready all to go help some Cubans? Yeah. Okay. So what is Pulitzer saying here? What's the what case is he making here? Yeah.
Why let others suffer when we succeeded to succeed?
Yeah, we could do something.
He's promoting Cubans' revolt using fear and hatred towards them.
What does he want us to do? He wants us to enter in something against us. Okay. What's that?
He wants to probably use U.S. troops.
Yeah. The United States entering this fight. So do you see? And so this would be the type of thing that you would see in American newspapers, basically just kind of getting us all amped up, possibly to do something in what was happening in Cuba. Well, McKinley does do something. McKinley is going to send an American battleship, the USS Maine, down to Cuba to protect American interests. Okay? American interests. So this huge American battleship sails into Havana Harbor, okay? You know, big ship, big guns. Well, no sooner does this ship arrive than it blows up. Okay? Well, this is what you would call an international incident, right? And the United States and Spain are both going to send teams of experts to go figure out what happened. And what the Spanish experts are going to determine is that this was an accident. Now, we didn't know it at the time, but it turns out that later evidence is going to show that Spain was probably correct here. You see, the main class of battleship was improperly designed. It had placed the ship's magazine, that's where the boom stuff is, too close to the ship's boiler. That's the hot thing. So in other words, the hot was too close to the boom, and you got bang bang. Okay? Anyway, the American investigation, however, was inconclusive. Basically, the Americans said, but You had a job, right?
We don't.
I said, go find out. Find out what happened. You didn't know what happened, so what do? You speculate, right? We call it speculation. And so, the end of the report is full of all sorts of things that it could possibly have been. And one of the things that was a possibility, I mean, come on, it could have been a Spanish mine. Okay? Well, the American press is going to read this report. And basically, you're reading the report, boring, 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 Spanish mine, boring, Spanish mine. Whoa! So, what is the cause of the main blowing up? Yes. Under a banner headline, remember the Maine, to hell with Spain! Okay? A Spanish mine. Yeah.
Why couldn't we just admit that we donkey?
What sells newspapers?
Well, I think if we admitted that government fucked up the ship, that'd be pretty.
But, okay, well, as far as the ship design, we don't really figure that out until later when some other ships have problems. That it's like, oh wow, the ships keep blowing up. I wonder if that's bad. So that it took us a while to actually figure out. At this point, what the United States was merely saying is officially is we're not sure this is a possibility. Does that make sense? And what what Pulitzer and Hearst seize on is the possibility, and they turn the possibility into fact. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do you mean by like a mine? Like a landmine?
Yeah, except we're in the water.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yeah, so basically this floating mine, this blow-up thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question from a while back. Was how long actually like somewhat accurate because it was a concentration camp, or?
It was an exaggeration.
So was most of what he said true or no?
He basically took each of there's a kernel to each one of those things, and he turned it into one big thing.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
And he probably also didn't look at the other side.
Yeah. He certainly wasn't going to be playing that. Okay. So that's the main sailing in, and that's what's left of it. Okay. And so now, just once again, while this entire event is happening, you have the press stoking the flames. Saying, oh my God, what are we doing about it? What are we doing to fix this problem? How are we going to take care of the poor Cubans? Oh, those poor Americans who died. What are we going to do? Well, it's at this point that the Spanish minister to the United States, Dupe is his name, okay? His name was Dupe de Lome, okay? And so the Spanish minister to the United States, his name is Dupe de Lome, is going to write a letter back to Spain in which he is going to describe the President of the United States. Okay? So just everybody imagine this. Put yourself, you've been stationed here in America, and you're now just going to give your candid, this is what I think of President McKinley. Okay, is everybody with me? And so in the letter, he says that McKinley is a politician who is swayed by public opinion and lacks good faith. Right? Now this was meant, okay, I'm the Spanish minister, I'm sending it to my boss back in Spain. But who gets hold of it? Actually, it's Hearst.
Oh, hers.
It's Hearst, okay? Hearst gets hold of the letter. Probably because they were transmitting it via cable. Okay, they usually had, you know, little spies in cable offices. Anyway, what Hearst will do is he will print the letter and then he will editorialize, declaring it to be the worst insult to the United States in its history. Okay, so you're picking up the paper in the morning, and it says, Spanish minister insults President of the United States, okay? And you read some of these excerpts, and you go, and then the editorial says, it's the worst insult to America in its history. You go, yeah, it is. Okay?
Wow.
Right? Now, draw a line. This isn't part of the letter, but it's something that is happening at the same time. Okay? At this very same time, President McKinley has gotten the Spanish to agree to an armistice with the rebels, to ending the concentration camps. And so America, with its diplomatic influence, has gotten Spain to basically take it down a notch, right? And so here you have it. Does everybody just kind of imagine? On one hand, you've got the American public going, oh, the main insults! Ah! And then you have the diplomatic corps saying, but boss, look what we did. And you are President McKinley, and you're trying to figure out your course of action. Hot and bothered public. Cool diplomacy. Who do you think gets the nod? Okay. And for my next step. How did I go backwards? I did that while I was dancing. Okay. Public opinion favored war. McKinley feared that the Democrats, most notably William Jennings Bryan, might use this against him in the election of 1900. That the fact that the United States is ignoring the poor Cuban people could be used against him in an election campaign. And so, on April 11th, 1898, he calls for a joint session of Congress and asks for a declaration of war. Now, Congress sees this war as, yes, they wanted to do it. They voted in favor of it. But does the United States, when it goes to war, does it like to have good reasons for going to war? Or does it like to have a good, good excuse? Does it like to say, hey, no, we're doing it for good, justifiable reasons? Yes, we do. It's kind of our thing. So what they're going to do is add an amendment to the war declaration, known as the Teller Amendment. And basically what the Teller Amendment said is that we are going to guarantee Cuba's freedom at the end of the war. So quickly, if you were asked, why are we going to war? If this amendment's in there, why are we going to war? What's your quick answer? We're going to war to free Cuba. the United States, right? Okay? We are going to war to free Cuba because that's who we are. We are going to war to help the freedom-loving Cubans. Got it? So here it is. That's Uncle Sam preparing to fight. Okay, rolling up his sleeves, to take on Spain. Okay, so I'm going to play for you it was a folk song which was written at the time. It's a modern edition of it, but it was a song that was in reaction to the Spanish-American War. So, like we had anti-war songs during the Vietnam War, there were anti-war songs during the Spanish-American War. And so this is a modern redoing of one of those songs. Does that make sense? And so I'm going to put up a couple questions that I want you to write into your notebook the answer to while the song is playing. Got it?
Now wars are never started by those who have to eventually fight them. And profit is often gained by those who plot and intrigue to ignite them. Now take the recent struggle twixt America and Spain. When all is said and all is done, there's only one man to blame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. He saw circulation sinking mighty low, so he says we need a yarn to put us on the go. Then he looked at Cuba, and then he looked at Spain. He says, I'll tell the world and God of Cuba's tragic shame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. And so he wrote of pain and tear, of anguish and despair, taxes made and orphans made, a print with bull and bear. He wrote of bleeding Cuba, he wrote of cruel Spain. He says that we should intervene in Christianity's name. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. And when the country was aroused as much as we could be, he scribbled off his masterpiece enthusiastically. He took his yellow quilted pen and then with great disdain, he wrote his editorial and sunk the good ship Maine. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. This fellow made a lot of money from the little war, and after it was over, boys, he made a whole lot more. Newspapers all around the land bear his famous name, but it began the day this man sunk the good ship Maine. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame. Editor, editor, we all know your name. Editor, editor, you're the man to blame.
So, who's the editor? Now there's two choices here, but he really meant one of the two. Which editor do you think is really going after?
Pulitzer.
It is hers.
Hers.
Okay. If you wrote Pulitzer, that you get the point, but he was actually going after hers. He kind of considered the bigger prize. He's pinning it on this editor. If you had throwing under bus powers, who else would you throw under the bus as far as being responsible? Yeah.
Would it be McKinley?
Yeah, you might be able to say McKinley. And anybody else as far as who? Who would you put?
American public?
Yeah, you know, the public was pulled in. Okay. Anyone else? I'm saying Congress. Okay. You know, I like to blame Congress for things. Final thing is, I kind of gave you, there's some details, okay? Was American intervention justified? And now, the word intervention, okay, the word intervention, if you want to use more loose construction as to what intervention means before you make your answer, that's fine. But who has a thought here as far as was American intervention justified? Yeah.
I think the fact that they were like intervening politically and trying to like settle tensions between the two was justified, but it wasn't quite bad enough to go to war.
Yeah. And so if you were doing a to what extent answer, I think that would be a good way of parsing it out. Okay? Rachel, did you have, no? No? Okay. So, anybody else have thoughts on American, yeah?
I mean, I don't think the war was justified because they had an armistice at hand that could have prevented the whole situation, I feel like.
Right.
They just signed that,
And didn't need it.
yes, and then Cuba would have years of instability.
Possible. So, Castro, Marisol. Yeah.
Also, I felt like it was more, they were justifying it more for their own reasons than to help Cuba. Like it was more for, like, they were just putting it as a spin on the US instead of what it actually is.
Okay. So, why were we going to war? One more time. Why were we going to war? What was the reason for America going to war with Spain?
Free Cuba.
Free Cuba, right? Okay. So, you're the United States, and you're going to war with Spain to free Cuba, right? You all with me? Where does a war to free Cuba from Spain begin? The Philippines. Okay? The Philippines, of course. Now, the reason why the war began in the Philippines, actually, the actions of Undersecretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt. So this is a couple years before he was governor of New York. He was actually in McKinley's administration as the Undersecretary of the Navy. And so one day, right before, as we're building up for war, Theodore Roosevelt, who basically had kind of a low opinion of McKinley, when McKinley had not yet gone the direction of the war, he started a rumor. He started to say that, William McKinley has the spine of an eclair. Anyway, Theodore Roosevelt, while his boss is out of the office, meaning that the Secretary of the Navy is not there, and so who's now in charge? Undersecretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt. So while he's in charge, he sends a cable to the commander of the Pacific Fleet to move his forces to the Philippines in case of war. Got it? So now, war is declared in April. And where are the closest American forces to Spanish forces in the world? In the Philippines. Does that make sense? And so in May of 1898, The commander of the Pacific Fleet, Commodore George Dewey, will destroy the Spanish fleet. The United States, before this battle, had been ranked like 5th in the world as far as the size of its navy. It just moved up a notch. Spain had a larger navy than the United States did, but Spain's navy had been built before the Age of Steel. And so they've got these old iron, they've even got some wooden ships out there. And you've got old iron and wooden ships against brand new steel ships. Guess what happens to Spain's forces in these battles? Completely wiped out. Completely. This will allow the United States to then land ground forces in the Philippines. And we will join along with Filipino rebels, and we will fight against Spain's control of the Philippines. And by August 1898, we had secured Manila and a good portion of Luzon for the United States. Since we now have this foothold way over in the Philippines, Congress and McKinley decide that we should ought to annex Hawaii to in effect make the Philippines closer to the United States. If that makes sense. The other thing that the United States will do at this point is, what did we just do to the Spanish fleet in the Pacific? It's gone. So, who is left to defend all of the other Spanish holdings in the Pacific? That would be nothing. And so what does the United States basically do next? Shopping spree. We basically sailed to every island that had a Spanish flag on it, and we would land and we would say, oh, that Spanish flag is completely wrong. I see something more in a star and stripe thing. Let's do that, shall we? And thus, this is how the United States gets Guam and a couple other little rocks throughout the Pacific. Okay. Each little rock is important, though, because it gives you a place to dump coal, it gives you a place to dump supplies, and allows you to, in effect, secure the Pacific as an American stronghold. Yeah?
So today is Guam like...
Yes.
No, I know
It's a territory.
Yeah, so is that like where like the military's like...
There's military there, yes.
So is that the main purpose of Guam like today? Or is there anything else?
It's probably less strategically important militarily than it used to be, because back then you needed to stop your ships for stuff. Now with largely nuclear-powered fleets and aircraft carriers, that role is less important.
Okay.
Dewey. Roosevelt to Dewey. Our ominous fleet. And several other just islands across the Pacific. So now, what was the reason we were going to war again? There was that Cuba thing. So, when the United States declares war on Spain, Spain declares war right back at us. And it sends its Atlantic fleet steaming to Cuba. Now, as this fleet is on its way to Cuba, the American newspapers are looking for something to write about, and the Spanish fleet going to Cuba, that's boring. So where do you imply the Spanish fleet is going if Cuba is a boring story?
America.
It's coming to America. And what do? You play it up, the next Spanish Armada is on its way, and they start printing up these stories of the imminent Spanish invasion of the United States. The Spanish are coming, the Spanish are coming, OMG. Panic breaks out in port cities. The Navy decides that it needs to take some action, and what they do is they go to the old graveyard of ships and they find old Civil War hulks and they tow them into the harbors in front of these port cities. And so that if you're in the city, you could just see the ship out there, and they put a whole bunch of midshipmen trainees on them to kind of wave. And so therefore, what can the Navy basically tell the American public? We got your back here. And who plays right along with it because it makes a nice story? The press. Okay? Meanwhile, the real fighting is going to take place in Cuba. And just kind of a note on the Spanish War is not a big war as far as casualties for the United States, at least in fighting is concerned. But a lot of people did die. And where they died was from sickness like dysentery in the training camps and from yellow fever in Cuba. Okay? So the Spanish did not put up a big fight against the United States, but the mosquitoes did. Okay? Mosquitoes. However, it will be during the Spanish War that Walter Reed will make the connection between illnesses like yellow fever and malaria to the mosquito. When the war began, Teddy Roosevelt is Undersecretary of the Navy. And he is bummed. Why is he bummed? He's got a desk job in Washington just when his generation is about to have its first great opportunity for glory. So what does he do? He resigns. He resigns as Undersecretary of the Navy, and then he uses some of his funds and borrows from others, and he creates a volunteer cavalry unit known as the Rough Riders. Okay? He then brings these people to his ranch in the Dakotas. They train to become a military unit, and they get themselves sent to Cuba. Now the fight in Cuba, okay, was largely for the highlands. Getting hold of high ground like San Juan Hill and Kettle Hill were the keys to victory. Theodore Roosevelt will lead a famous charge up San Juan Hill to secure it for the United States. And many people will credit this charge and this acquisition of the hill for winning the war. This is the fame that Teddy Roosevelt would use to get himself elected governor of New York. Now, the story is a little bit more complicated. The only reason why Theodore Roosevelt is able to make this charge is that back then you had the military fought in segregated units, and there were 4 African American units that were taking heavy fire just as Theodore Roosevelt made this charge. And so basically, they were the ones who were getting shot at, they were the ones who were dying, so that Theodore Roosevelt could make this charge up the hill. And Theodore Roosevelt could secure this hill. And Theodore Roosevelt could get glory. And Theodore Roosevelt could become president of the United States eventually. Does that make sense? Theodore Roosevelt and his guys, when they got to the top of the hill, belted out the song, "There'll be a hot time in the old town tonight," okay? And basically it spreads like wildfire that this has kind of become the song of the invasion and what then becomes the hit song in America, okay? Be a hot time in the old town tonight. Okay, yeah.
Did Teddy Roosevelt get in trouble for sending that fleet to the Philippines?
No, he convinced the Claire Spine one that it was in America's interest for him to do so. The last gasp of Spain in Cuba was that its fleet was basically kind of bottled up in Santiago Harbor. And they decided they were going to send the fleet out to fight the Americans. At the beginning of the war, the United States had a ship off the coast of California known as the USS Oregon. They get signal that the war is on. And it arrives in Cuba just as the Spanish are making their break out of Santiago Harbor.
Isn't Santiago in Chile?
There's another one. Yeah, there's another one. The USS Oregon nearly destroys the entire Spanish fleet on its own. Now, one way to look at it, hey, it got there on time. Hooray. The way that Theodore Roosevelt saw it is that it barely got there in time. And what we would need to make it so that this type of situation would never happen again is a canal. Okay? With the Spanish fleet destroyed, we can now go on shopping spree part 2. And someone mentioned a moment ago, I think it was Rita, Puerto Rico. This is how we acquire Puerto Rico.
What year was it?
This is 1898. Finally, Spain says enough. And we call for an armistice in 1898. Can anyone find Theodore Roosevelt?
In the middle.
Of course he's in the middle. The results. Result number 1. We now have yet another Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris of 1898, where the United States will get from Spain Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines, and Cuba will be free. Yes?
Why is the Treaty of Paris?
On the cheese. I know it. Paris was a traditional place to do negotiations. You usually do your negotiations in a separate place from where fighting is taking place. And the, you might have heard the phrase lingua franca. The language of negotiations, the lingua franca, the French, the language of negotiations is French. This treaty all of a sudden turns the United States into a world power, a power in the Far East. How do you get an empire? Take it from someone else. Okay? We basically stole Spain's empire from Spain. Now, even though the Teller Amendment guaranteed Cuba its freedom, what exactly is freedom anyway? Okay. And once the United States, in effect, controls Cuba, they were very hesitant on simply giving it up entirely. And so what we're going to do with Cuba is that in order for American forces to be withdrawn, Cuba had to insert into its constitution what is known as the Platt Amendment. What the Platt Amendment did is, first, it says Cuba may not have foreign relations, any treaties with any country but the United States. 2, the United States has the right to intervene in Cuban affairs whenever the United States feels it needed to intervene in Cuban affairs. 3, the United States is given a perpetual lease for a Navy base in a place known as Guantanamo Bay. You never know when you need a place to stick terrorists. Okay? Yes?
But why did they get rid of this, like, amendment with Guantanamo Bay? Because
We kept Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
We will free Cuba of the other parts of it later when you end up with someone like Franklin Roosevelt, the President of the United States, feeling that the United States should not be intervening in everybody's business. Okay. Now, United States has an empire. The question becomes, what about the people? Are all the people that just became part of the United States because the United States acquired the empire, Americans that are protected under the United States Constitution? Okay? That became the question. And so, basically, I want you all to imagine, see, here is the United States, okay, it's flag, woo! United States, okay? All right, so you're in the United States, okay? Okay, so we have now taken the Philippines. We hold that for a moment. All right, so the Philippines. All right, so here are the Philippines, people. Clearly American because we put what on it? The flag. That's American territory, people. Hoorah! However, do the Filipinos get the Bill of Rights, Constitution, and all that jazz? And the answer would be United States Supreme Court will rule in a series of cases known as the insular cases. The insular cases. That the Constitution does not necessarily follow the flag. And so in other words, you can have a place that is American, but the people in it do not get the Constitution.
Is that why, like, Puerto Rico can vote?
Yes. Okay. That is why. Yes.
So Puerto Rico makes their own laws.
Yes, they do.
So are they like similar?
Yes, they are part of the United States, actually. They just aren't states. Does that make sense? And the level of protection and stuff like that has grown since that point, since this case was decided. At this case, when this case is decided, they got basically nothing except for the fact they were part of the United States. Does that make sense? Okay, yeah.
So would you consider Puerto Rico a colony today?
It is a territory today. Not quite, because they are under the Constitution. They are protected by the Bill of Rights. If you were born there, you have free immigration to the United States as a citizen, and if you move to a state that has, you have the same thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, don't make that. Stop. Okay. There's one last thing. People started to regard what the United States was doing as against our core principles. They formed organizations that we call the Anti-Imperialist League. Members included people like Jane Addams, Andrew Carnegie, who actually offered $20 million to the United States government to purchase the freedom of the Philippines, and Mark Twain. And basically what they're going to say is that it is a violation of the consent of the governed for the United States to simply rule the Philippines. And then secondly, and this is a little bit slippery slope if you're a logic person, but they argued that despotism abroad might beget despotism at home, meaning that if we're ruling you like a king, like a despot way over there, and we don't care about the Constitution over there, what's to stop that same type of principle being practiced here at home? Check out Schoology for the two quotes I want you to compare and contrast, taking into account today's lecture. Got it?